Gaza is just an open sore that allows Netanyahu to continue to politically survive because he's able to continue the sort of forever war. During the campaign, they were the people who were poisoning the blood of good, pure white Americans.
The cats and the dogs, yeah.
Now you realize that's your cheap labor. You want to take your cheap labor and send it back to Mexico and Guatemala. There's an anger that's welling up in normal America against what these guys are actually doing.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Readiness Report with me, Redi Tlhabi, and the Daily Maverick. And I am in Washington, where I live, where my head continues to spin because there's just one drama after another. So before we went to bed last night at 3 a.m. Israeli time, Israel struck Iran. It seemed as if the moment that Israel has been preparing for 30 years had finally come. It was a significant attack. And all we've heard thus far is that Israel has been targeting nuclear facilities, military and scientific leadership, and so on. But there are already reports that there were some civilian casualties. And so that kind of back and forth is going to happen. What we do know also is that over 200 Israeli Air Force aircraft took part in the initial strikes. It saw fighter jets hit over 100 targets with over 300 munitions. Those are just the numbers, just to give you the scale or the magnitude, idea of the scale and the magnitude of this. I think it's just a frightening moment for the region, for the world. There's also a lot of reflections around the United States' role in all of this. Many commentators that I've been following have been saying over the years that Israel's goal is to drag the United States into a war that it can ill afford. The US's reaction to this was quite interesting. Marco Rubio didn't hesitate to issue a statement using, I think, words that it never traditionally uses when dealing with its ally, Israel. Said this was a unilateral act by the Israelis, and that the US wants peace. It has nothing to do with the United States. But there was an almost ominous threat, I think, where the US says if Iran strikes or retaliates against US targets, then there'll be consequences, something like that. The term US targets is so vague, right? Not targets. Let me just rephrase that. Said if it retaliates against US interests. So, the word U.S. interests or the words U.S. interests could be anything, really. The U.S. and Israel have this deep relationship. And if Iran were to retaliate, would the United States interpret that as being indirectly directed at the United States, thereby justifying U.S. involvement? Or did Israel score such a significant victory last night that there would be no need for the United States to be involved? Anyway, that's the one thing that is going on. People are skeptical, cynical, saying there's no way that Israel could pull off such a dramatic and historic attack on Iran's nuclear facilities and some key personnel without U.S. intelligence, without U.S. support. Where does this put all the peace talks or the deal talks, the talks that have been going on? Can Iran trust that the U.S. is an honest broker in all of this? We'll thresh this out. But there are other things happening in the United States. There's a military parade that is being planned in the way that dictators do. Donald Trump's birthday. Why would you celebrate with a military parade? Why does a democracy need a military parade? Look, let's just remember what it was like living in the townships in South Africa. I will use the 1980s because that's when I was in the township. But those who are older than myself will remember the military patrolling our streets, showing off their big guns and their big cars. I remember when I was a kid that this was almost daily entertainment. We didn't have a sense as children of the symbolism and the political moment. Every time the South African Defence Force paraded the streets, we, the children, would just stop what we were doing to just watch. It was a spectacle. Little did we know that our very existence was being threatened. And that this entire exercise of patrolling the streets, apartheid army, big guns in our streets, was meant to intimidate. And that's what I want you to keep in mind. This is not just pageantry and just a show, a parade. A parade has such positive connotations. It is a show of force. It is what dictatorships, what dictators do to show their potential, to demonstrate and flex their military power. So that's certainly how I see this thing. What else has been happening in the United States? In California, the courts have just ruled that Donald Trump does not have the right to bring in the National Guard. They must get out of there. But it was all just chaotic. And many people can't believe that they are living in the United States today. But if you've been following US foreign policy, US domestic policy, you just see how US exceptionalism is steeped into showing off economic and military might. The language of power has been baked into US psychology. And for some of us, even as you can't believe this is happening in the United States, you can actually believe this is happening in the United States. So Phillip van Niekerk is back on the Readiness Report, because I thought instead of us wasting time having a beer and me a Prosecco on a Friday, we have a boring friendship, because these are the things that we talk about, right? If we were to get together for a drink, this is what we would be talking about. So why not just create a conversation where the entire world is let in on our thoughts and insights on what's going on in the United States? Phillip, hello.
Hi, Redi. Hi.
Okay, where do you want to start?
What a night. I mean,
where do you want to start?
Well, let's see. Are we in World War III yet? Probably not. I think that what we saw last night was, and what we're still seeing, in fact, was 6 waves of Israeli attacks. Essentially, it was a sort of a decapitation operation. I mean, I've been gathering lists of the top Revolutionary Guard generals have been taken out, top nuclear scientists, many of the advisors to the supreme leader, Ali Khamenei. And I think that, so many targets were hit. I'm not quite sure whether they were able to take out Iran's nuclear capacity, which is very much buried in the mountains and might require an American kind of bombing operation, if you like. But it's proved devastating. And I think the question now is, where does it go from here? And what can the Iranians do about it? And I think the Israelis have established essentially that Iran is virtually defenseless. They sent a swarm of drones. They were all taken down. What else can Iran do? I mean, we've known since last year, when there were tit-for-tat bombings on each Israel and Iran, that Israel has sort of really established itself as the hegemon in the region and is militarily much more powerful than Iran. So Iran is essentially, I think, on its knees right now. And the question in terms of its response is, do they respond by hitting the other Gulf states? Do they attack the American operations in Syria and Iraq? Or do they, what does Iran do? Because this is humiliating. It is a big moment. And I think that, what happens to the American peace, so-called nuclear talks? Well, I don't see that Iran is going to come back to the table very soon. I do believe that the United States was aware that this was going to happen, and probably approved it. I think Netanyahu and Trump had a discussion on Monday night, and Netanyahu convinced Trump that this would actually help the negotiations. And if you're thinking like a sort of gunboat diplomacy, you use pressure to force people to come to your terms. And Trump was maybe sold on the idea that, okay, let Israel have a go, because kind of at the root of this is a dispute over what kind of nuclear engagement does Iran have in the future. And Witkoff, who is Trump's special envoy, had come up along with the Saudis and the Gulf states, had come up with a fairly innovative idea that you create a nuclear consortium with Saudi, UAE, Iran, and the United States, essentially working together to provide civilian nuclear power. But then you take out everything else. And the Iranians, first of all, they wanted to maintain some independent nuclear enrichment capacity, not up to bomb status or whatever. And I think that Trump then decided, no, it's zero. And the problem with the negotiations is that the Americans, having lured the Iranians in with the notion that, there was a possibility of something reasonable on the table, were then presented with vacillating the United States. What is the Americans' position really? They came back with the offer last week and said, this offer that you've given us, which is like zero enrichment, that's not acceptable. And we've made that clear from the very beginning. That's not going to be acceptable. Trump then says, well, we gave them a great offer they can't refuse, kind of thing, and I guess he thought that anybody who's seen The Godfather will know the reference. He thought that Netanyahu might produce the sort of horse's head in the bed kind of moment. But in actual fact, what we've seen is something much more extensive, something that obviously speaks to, what Israel has been trying to do for a long time. And you've got to really understand, since October 7th, 2023, what Israel has done has completely asserted itself and its military superiority over the entire region. Hamas has been degraded. Gaza is just an open sore that allows, Netanyahu to continue to remain politically survive because he's able to continue the sort of forever war. Hezbollah has been decapitated, so they've rearranged Lebanon. Syria, there's been regime change. And you go through and the allies of Iran have sort of one by one been taken out or gone down, and now you get to the big kind of power at the end of it all. And so where do you go from here? And I think Israel is aiming for regime change. They're hoping that
let's just pause a little bit and just talk about the motives for this attack. So much has been made of the talks around a deal, but Trump has continued also warning Iran that if you don't do this, then we will come after you and so on. But very quick last night to distance the United States. I think we, those of us who've been following this for many years, we believe that there's no way Israel could have done this without the US, without US military support, intelligence support, the technology used to intercept the drones coming from Iran, and so on. But a question then has to be asked. Israel continues to say in the aftermath and even in the build-up of this that Iran is threatening its existence. Given the scale of what happened last night, can Israel continue to claim that Iran had the capacity to wipe Israel off the map? Heaven forbid. That's not what we're calling for. But the justification for this attack is that Iran was developing a nuclear weapon that it aimed to use and direct at Israel. Does that have any modicum of truth now in 2025?
Well, I don't think it's entirely wrong. You have the International Energy Agency finding last week that Iran has enriched to much greater levels than was previously believed, and basically weeks away from producing fissile material, and could be even further down that path. Now, that doesn't mean that Iran is about to kind of get rid of exterminate Israel. They don't have the capacity to launch a military weapon, even if a nuclear weapon, even if they had one. So I think it more comes down to the fact that Israel wants to establish its military dominance over the region, and would like to kind of get rid of the current regime in Tehran. I think this goes much further. If you look at how they took out Hezbollah in Lebanon, it wasn't just about fighting back and taking out the leadership of Hezbollah. They did that in a kind of clinically, in a clinical way. It was about changing the politics of Lebanon.
Yes.
And again, Syria, even though they don't like this current guy and they don't like the current regime, they certainly, helped, I'm sure, kind of like push Assad out. So, they're not just looking at kind of war, they're looking at fundamentally kind of restructuring the way the Middle East is. And if you go back to, I think a lot of this mess also comes down to the fact that Trump withdrew from the JCPOA, which was a nuclear deal signed, Barack Obama did in
Obama.
2015. It wasn't just about nuclear, but it was about kind of ultimately reintegrating Iran into, the world economy, and the United States getting out of, fights in the Middle East that they didn't really have, that much interest in. But the one thing that the other states, the Gulf states, didn't like about the deal was that it didn't deal with Iran's ability to project, through its proxies or its allies, a threat to other countries, not just Israel, through the Houthis or Hezbollah or the Shia militias in Syria and Iraq. And so, that part was always sort of missing. Now, that part, in a way, has been demolished by Israel since last year. They've gone methodically, one by one. They've assassinated, they've killed, they've taken out Iran's allies, and so that threat is kind of is looking very weak.
What happens now, Phillip? I want us to get on to the U.S. stuff in the military parade. So where are we now? What is Washington likely to do? What is Iran likely to do? What do the next few weeks look like?
Well, I think if Iran chooses to hit the American facilities in Syria and Iraq, then that will bring America into the fight. The reality is that Iran doesn't have a lot of allies in the region, and Russia is not going to come to their aid, and China is certainly not going to come to their aid.
They just condemn, but
Turkey,
not
Turkey and
actually
India, people will kind of pretend to condemn, but are probably quite happy to see Iran, see the Ayatollah and his guys pushed back a little bit. But the possibility that this kind of like gets out of hand, gets out of control, I think that must be a concern for everybody in the region. And the sort of total kind of recklessness with which Israel is behaving is extremely. I mean, people of the region, they want peace, they want to get on with business and commerce, and there was a deal, there was a possibility of a deal with Iran, and the military option, which Israel has now taken and decisively changed the nature of the game, is going to make it very hard.
I mean, the U.S. statements now have no credibility, right? I just think that how do you trust? How do the Iranians ever trust the U.S. to make any kind of deal? If you are in the Iranian leadership, what's left of it? Do you choose to put your security in the hands of a deal with the U.S. or in developing a nuclear deterrent? And that's where the focus is. What does Iran do now that it has been incapacitated? Okay, so we're watching this one. Let's just move on to something else. We are living in a country where a senator gets kicked out of a press conference with the Home Secretary for daring to ask a question. The National Guard is on the streets of California. What on earth is happening in this country?
Well, I think what happened in California is that people in Trump's administration who believe very strongly that immigrants should be essentially all kicked out of the United States saw California as an opportunity to go and start getting really tough, not just with criminals, not just with people who might pose any kind of problem to society, but with ordinary people. And part of the problem is, Trump's campaign, the reason why he won was based on scapegoating immigrants. And a lie that these people were kind of invading the United States, poisoning the blood of the United States, eating the dogs and cats, and just generally, creating problems. Whereas in actual fact, a large portion of the working class of this country are undocumented people, and even Trump acknowledged that. So these were guys. The trouble started at a Home Depot, which is a kind of hardware store that sells everything hardware, who go outside because people go to the hardware store and they buy things. And you just remember California, Los Angeles had just been through the most devastating fires. So everybody's out at Home Depot buying things, fix up their houses and so on. And these casual workers go and they congregate there, waiting to get picked up for, to go and work there for a day or so, or help with the contracting. And so they went in force, ICE, to kind of arrest people. They arrested a 4-year-old girl. They arrested,
Oh.
ordinary, kind of civilians, people just trying to get along, and provoked a situation which, there was a certain measure of violence, but this idea that the Republicans have been spreading that, Los Angeles is burning again is this nonsense. And then it gave them a perfect excuse, which is what they want, to nationalize, federalize the National Guard, send them in and break some heads and show, because Trump has always had this problem in 2020, the George Floyd demonstrations, were, he felt like they were badly handled and that what they really needed was this massive military crackdown on people.
Do you think this kind of something interesting happened there? Given Newsom was kind of launched into the international spotlight. He stood down. Trump has just lost in the courts when it comes to that. What does it mean for this debate around the crackdowns on migrants, and how is Congress likely to respond to this situation, especially the legal aspect of it, that legal case that they lost?
Right. Well, I think two things, very important things, actually three very important things came out this week. The first is the one you've referred to, which is the courts have said, you don't have the right to kind of find some obscure law to justify federalizing the National Guard and sending the military into the streets of an American city. This is not what this is about. The second thing, of course, is that Newsom emerged as a very almost looked presidential this week. And the Democratic Party, which has been struggling to find leadership, let's just say, this was for the first time we were seeing a really effective Democratic leader pushing back against Trump, pushing back against, these people around him. And that was also important. But the third thing, which has kind of got lost in all this, is Trump was saying yesterday, all of a sudden he's discovered, oh, well, there are all these people, undocumented people, who, work at hotels and golf courses and work and
his favorite hangouts.
Exactly. But also work on the farms, because the farmers have obviously been talking to him. And so we can't do mass deportations of these good people. Suddenly they're good people. During the campaign, they were the people who were poisoning the blood of good, pure white Americans.
The cats and the dogs, yeah.
Now you realize that's your cheap labor. You want to take your cheap labor and send it back to Mexico and Guatemala. And what are you going to do? Who's going to cook for you? Who's going to pick your banana your tomatoes or whatever? Mm-hmm. So he's kind of like, but that's a big thing for him to concede, because the Stephen Millers, the really hardliners in the administration, are pushing for all undocumented people to go out. And that speaks to the broken immigration system in the United States, that so many people are undocumented because the system hasn't been able to catch up with the reality that so many people, kind of work, do good jobs, live good lives in the United States, get university degrees and so on, who are not documented. And that's because the immigration system doesn't cater for reality, because it's always subject to political demagoguing, mainly by the Republican Party. And for Trump to say that, I think was an extraordinary kind of moment. Got lost in, we had Indian airliners crashing. We had so much going on yesterday. And I think it was like, okay, it was like the premise of his campaign, he was basically saying, was BS.
All right. I don't want to end our conversation before we talk about the military parade. Are you going? What will you be wearing? Will you be on the streets of DC waving a flag, an American flag at the military parade? What's happening?
Okay. Well, I'm delighted to tell you that there's going to be a massive thunderstorm in Washington tomorrow evening. What do they say about raining on your parade?
Yeah.
There's also going to be demonstrations all over the country. No King demonstration. In fact, just up the road from us, there's going to be in Bethesda, there's going to be a demonstration, and in Rockville. And so, I think that there's going to be people opposing, the military parade and opposing this kind of, dictator kind of behavior, are going to be out on the streets. And so it'll be very interesting to see the kind of numbers, because I think there's a sort of an anger that's welling up in in normal America against what these guys are actually doing, what they're taking the United States.
But can they not manipulate the language here? I'm already seeing a whole lot of disinformation around those who are going to the protest, the No Kings protest, that they'll be armed and dangerous. So the disinformation machinery is hard at work, maligning those who are firstly opposed to the military parade and opposed to this kind of creeping authoritarian impulse in the U.S. Administration. I guess where I'm going is that these military parades, and I've been thinking about that in the context of Soweto and where I grew up, is that for the powerful people, they are used to intimidate. But military parades also happen in democracies as well. They can be used to commemorate something historical. They can be grand spectacles, but also a very powerful, threatening message. So it's kind of easy to use a parade to inspire patriotism and so on, whereas the real meaning of it is actually quite nefarious. So I'm just wondering how it's going to land, as a celebration of American power and democracy, or as a dictator, an authoritarian regime wagging its finger and saying, this is what we are capable of.
In 250 years, you've never had a military parade like this in the United States. Doesn't do it like that. That's the reality. And the other thing, of course, is this is coming at a time when there are authoritarian assaults on so many levels in the United States. And to top it off, I mean, the cherry on the top is it's Trump's birthday. And, it really looks like it's the king's birthday kind of celebration. It's not about, the army. It's about power and dominance.
I mean, it feels like a Zimbabwe. Remember how Zimbabwe used to have these big birthday celebrations for Robert Mugabe?
Yeah.
It's so surreal. We've never had that in South Africa, where a president's birthday, the country just comes to a standstill with all that pageantry and the, baked into. Oh my word! It's just surreal.
He wants to be Vladimir Putin. I mean, this is what the Russians have done historically. They do that.
And Kim Jong-un, right? There are always these military
Kim Jong-un,
parades
North
happening.
Korea. It's not. The United States allegedly, as a democracy, uses its military to fight overseas, but it doesn't use its military to put down dissent or to kind of brag about itself, internally. And at the same time, he sort of these military bases that had their names changed, like Fort Bragg.
Yeah.
From Confederate generals who had basically fought to defend slavery and started and fought in a civil war. And under the Democrats, under Biden, a lot of those names were changed. Now he's changing them back. He's making a really, he's making a statement about, where America is and where he wants to be. Right. And I think we're living in a very scary time, both domestically and internationally. I mean, what can I say?
Yeah, we'll leave it at that. Everybody in such a contemplative mood this morning, trying to figure out what is happening. If you find the answer, let us know. Phillip van Niekerk, thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Redi.
Hey, folks, that's the Readiness Report with the Daily Maverick. I'm Redi Tlhabi. Take care of yourselves, whatever that means. Bye-bye.